What if the reason toxic people keep showing up in your life isn't because of them, but because of how you respond to them? Think about that for a moment. Because most people spend their entire lives trying to escape toxic individuals, changing environments, cutting people off, starting over. Yet they keep running into the same patterns again and again. Different faces, same behavior. Different situations, same emotional outcome. And they never stop to question the one variable that has always been in their control: their reaction. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Toxic people are not as powerful as you think. They don't need control over your life. They only need control over your emotions. The moment they can trigger you, frustrate you, confuse you, or pull you into their chaos, they've already won the interaction without ever needing your permission. And the moment you react the way they expect, you become predictable. And anything predictable can be influenced. But imagine this for a second. What if you stopped reacting? What if, instead of explaining yourself to people who don't value understanding, you stayed calm? What if, instead of defending your worth in every conversation, you stood firm without saying a word? What if the very thing toxic people rely on, your emotional reaction, suddenly disappeared? Everything would shift. Because when you remove your reaction, you remove their power. And that's exactly what most people never learn. They think strength is about arguing better, speaking louder, or proving a point. But real strength is quieter than that. It's controlled. It's intentional. It's the ability to stay grounded when everything around you is trying to pull you off balance. So before you decide how to deal with toxic people, you need to understand something far more important. You don't need to fight them. You need to master yourself. And once you see this clearly, you'll never look at toxic people the same way again. Let's go deeper into something most people completely misunderstand. And it's the reason they stay stuck in cycles with toxic people for years. Toxic people do not have power on their own. They don't walk into a room carrying some invisible force that controls you. Their power is not internal, it's borrowed. And the source they borrow it from is you. More specifically, it's your emotional reaction. Think about it carefully. Every toxic interaction follows a pattern. There's a trigger, something they say, something they imply, something they do that feels disrespectful, unfair, or intentionally provocative. And then, almost instantly, there's your response. Your heart rate shifts, your thoughts speed up. You feel the urge to defend yourself, to correct them, to prove your worth, to push back. And in that exact moment, the transfer of power happens. Because now, they're no longer just speaking, you're reacting. And when you react emotionally, you're no longer in control of the situation. You're inside it. You're playing by rules that were never designed for your peace, only for their advantage. Psychologically, this is important to understand. Toxic individuals often operate through what could be described as emotional leverage. They test boundaries not to understand you, but to find where you are most reactive. Where do you get defensive? Where do you feel the need to explain? Where do you lose your composure? Once they find that point, they don't need to overpower you. They simply press the button. And every time you react the same way, you reinforce the pattern. You teach them exactly how to control the interaction. It becomes predictable, reliable, almost automatic. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. This only works if you participate. Because if there is no reaction, there is no reinforcement. And if there is no reinforcement, the behavior loses its function. But most people never break this cycle because they confuse reaction with strength. They think, if I don't respond, I'm letting them win. So they argue, they explain, they defend, they try to be understood by someone who is not trying to understand them in the first place. And that's where the real loss happens. Because now your focus shifts. Instead of maintaining your own clarity, your own stability, your own sense of self, you start managing their perception of you. You start trying to fix something that was never yours to fix. That's emotional exhaustion. And toxic people thrive in that environment because it keeps you engaged. It keeps you invested. It keeps you within reach. But imagine a different response. Imagine that same moment, the same comment, the same tone, the same attempt to provoke. But instead of reacting instantly, you pause. Not out of hesitation, but out of control. You observe what's happening without immediately stepping into it. You recognize the pattern, and instead of giving them the reaction they expect, you give them nothing they can use. No emotional spike. No defensive explanation. No escalation. Just calm awareness. In that moment, something subtle but powerful shifts. The pattern breaks. The script they were relying on no longer works. And for the first time, they're not in control of the interaction. You are. This is not about suppressing how you feel. It's about refusing to let your feelings be used against you. There's a difference between experiencing an emotion and expressing it impulsively. One is awareness. The other is surrender. And toxic people don't need your awareness, they need your impulsive reaction. Remove that, and you remove their leverage. This is why emotional discipline is so powerful. It's not about being distant or detached from life. It's about being deeply connected to yourself in a way that no external behavior can easily disrupt. When you reach that point, toxic people become predictable, almost transparent. You start to see the pattern before it fully unfolds. And because you see it, you're no longer pulled into it. That's when their power starts to fade. Not because they changed, but because you did. And once you truly understand this, once you see that their influence exists only through your reaction, you begin to realize something that changes everything. No one can control you unless you give them access to your response. Now, once you understand that toxic people feed off your reactions, the next question becomes unavoidable. What do you actually do in the moment when it's happening? Because awareness alone is not enough. You can understand the pattern perfectly and still fall into it if you haven't trained yourself to respond differently. This is where everything changes. You stop reacting emotionally. And that sounds simple on the surface, but what it really means is this. You interrupt the automatic version of yourself, the version that feels attacked and immediately wants to defend, the version that hears disrespect and instantly wants to correct it, the version that mistakes emotional intensity for strength. Most people live inside that automatic loop. Something happens, and they respond without thinking. It feels natural, it feels justified, it even feels necessary. But it's also predictable. And anything predictable can be controlled. Toxic people are not guessing your reactions, they are relying on them. So when you decide to stop reacting emotionally, you're not just changing your behavior, you're removing their ability to predict and manipulate you. But let's be clear about something. Not reacting emotionally does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean you ignore everything, accept everything, or allow people to walk over you. That's not strength. That's avoidance. What this requires is something much more precise. It requires a pause, a deliberate space between what happens to you and how you respond to it. In that pause, you regain control, because instead of being driven by the first emotion that rises, anger, frustration, defensiveness, you step back and evaluate. You ask yourself, what is actually happening here? Not what it feels like, but what it is. Is this person trying to understand me or provoke me? Is this conversation productive, or is it a setup? Is my response going to resolve anything, or just escalate it? Those questions create clarity, and clarity weakens emotional manipulation. Because when you see the situation clearly, you're no longer reacting, you're choosing. And choice is power. Now, here's where it becomes difficult. Because in that moment, everything inside you will still want to react. Your body doesn't immediately change just because your mindset does. You will still feel the surge. You will still feel the pull to respond the way you always have. But this is where discipline comes in. You don't act on the first emotion. You let it pass through you without turning it into behavior. That's a skill. And like any skill, it gets stronger with practice. The first time you do it, it will feel unnatural. The second time, slightly easier. And over time, it becomes your default. And something interesting starts to happen. You begin to notice that most toxic interactions lose momentum when they are not met with emotional energy. It's like a fire that can't find oxygen. Without your reaction, there's nothing to fuel it. The conversation either de-escalates or it ends. And both outcomes work in your favor. Because you are no longer trapped in a cycle of reaction and regret. You are no longer replaying conversations in your mind, thinking about what you should have said differently. You are no longer drained by interactions that never had any real value to begin with. Instead, you remain steady. And that steadiness changes how people experience you. Toxic individuals begin to feel a lack of access. They can't reach you the way they used to. They can't pull you into emotional chaos. And because of that, they either adjust their behavior or they distance themselves. Again, either way, you gain control of your environment. But the deeper shift is internal, because when you stop reacting emotionally, you start trusting yourself more. You realize that you don't need to prove anything in the moment. You don't need to win every interaction. You don't need to be understood by everyone. You just need to stay aligned with your own standards. That's where real confidence comes from. Not from dominating conversations, but from mastering yourself within them. So the next time you feel that familiar trigger, the urge to react, to defend, to engage, don't rush. Pause. Breathe. Observe. And then decide, consciously, what deserves your response and what doesn't. Because the moment you stop reacting automatically is the moment you start living intentionally, and that is the moment toxic people begin to lose their grip on you. Now, this is where the misunderstanding becomes dangerous, because once you begin to pull back from emotional reactions, people, sometimes even you, start to question it. They think, if I don't react, I look weak. If I don't defend myself immediately, I'm letting them win. If I stay calm while someone disrespects me, I'm accepting it. But that belief is built on a shallow definition of strength, because real strength is not loud. It is not reactive. It is not desperate to be seen or validated in every moment. Real strength is controlled. It is deliberate. It is grounded in self-respect that does not require constant external confirmation. And that's the distinction most people never make. Weakness reacts. Strength responds. Weakness is impulsive. Strength is measured. Weakness is driven by emotion. Strength is guided by awareness. When you react instantly, what you're really doing is surrendering control of yourself to the situation. You're allowing someone else's behavior to dictate your state of mind, your tone, your words, your actions. That's not power. That's dependence. Because now your stability is no longer internal. It's conditional. It depends on how others treat you. And that is exactly what toxic people rely on. They rely on your need to defend yourself. They rely on your urge to correct every misunderstanding. They rely on your emotional attachment to being seen in a certain way. Because as long as they can trigger that need, they can control your behavior. But when you begin to understand that your worth is not determined in a single conversation, everything changes. You no longer feel the pressure to react immediately. You no longer feel the urgency to prove your point in real time. You no longer feel threatened by every challenge, every tone, every opinion. Instead, you become selective. You start asking yourself, is this even worth my energy? Is this person capable of understanding what I'm saying? Is this a moment that requires a response, or is silence the stronger choice? That level of discernment is what separates emotional reactivity from emotional control. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to appear strong, you actually become stronger. Because you are no longer performing strength. You are embodying it. There is a quiet confidence in someone who doesn't rush to speak. There is authority in someone who doesn't feel the need to interrupt, to argue, to dominate. There is power in someone who can sit in discomfort without immediately trying to escape it through reaction. That kind of presence is rare. And because it's rare, it's respected. Even by toxic people. They may not admit it, but they feel it. They recognize when they no longer have easy access to your emotions. They notice when their usual tactics stop working. And in that moment, the dynamic shifts, because control requires predictability. And you are no longer predictable. You are no longer the person who reacts the same way every time. You are no longer the person who can be easily pulled into arguments or emotional traps. You are no longer the person who needs to win every exchange to feel secure. You've stepped into something deeper. Self-mastery. And self-mastery doesn't mean you never speak up. It doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect or avoid confrontation. In fact, it allows you to handle those moments with far greater precision. Because now, when you do speak, it's intentional. It's not fueled by emotion. It's guided by clarity. You choose your words carefully. You set boundaries without aggression. You communicate without needing validation. And if the situation doesn't deserve your response, you are completely at peace with walking away. That's not weakness. That's control. And control is what toxic people cannot compete with, because their entire strategy depends on emotional chaos. They need confusion. They need escalation. They need reaction. But when they encounter someone who is calm, grounded, and intentional, their strategy collapses. There's nothing to manipulate, nothing to provoke, nothing to control. And this is where your power becomes undeniable, not because you've overpowered them, but because you've outgrown the need to engage on their level. So the next time you feel that instinct to react, to prove, to defend, to win, pause and ask yourself one question. Am I trying to control the situation, or am I in control of myself? Because the moment you choose self-control over emotional reaction is the moment you stop giving away your strength and start becoming someone no toxic person can ever control. Now let's bring everything together, because even if you understand reactions, and even if you've started practicing emotional control, there's one final shift that determines whether you actually regain your power in real life. And it comes down to this: you must learn to protect your energy and choose what deserves your response. Because not every situation in your life is worth your attention. Not every comment deserves your explanation. Not every person deserves access to your mental space. And not every battle is one you should step into. Most people lose their peace not because of what others do, but because of what they allow themselves to engage with. They respond to everything. They explain everything. They correct everything. They feel obligated to address every opinion, every accusation, every misunderstanding. And over time, that constant engagement drains them. It drains their focus. It drains their clarity. It drains their emotional stability. And eventually, they start living reactively instead of intentionally. But when you begin to protect your energy, something powerful happens. You stop treating every interaction as if it requires your participation. You start recognizing that your time, your attention, and your emotional bandwidth are limited resources. And like any valuable resource, they must be allocated wisely. Think about it this way. Every time you engage with negativity, you are investing energy into something that may not give anything meaningful back. And if the interaction is designed to provoke you, manipulate you, or exhaust you, then your response is not solving the problem, it's sustaining it. So the question becomes not, can I respond? But rather, should I respond? That shift alone changes everything. Because now you are no longer operating on impulse. You are operating on judgment, on discernment, on awareness of what actually matters in the long run. And when you consistently choose not to engage with what doesn't serve you, you begin to notice a pattern. Your life becomes quieter, not empty, but clear. Your thoughts become more organized. Your emotions become more stable. Your decisions become more intentional. You stop carrying unnecessary conversations in your head. You stop revisiting interactions that were never worth your energy in the first place. And most importantly, you stop giving power to people who have no authority over your life. Toxic individuals often rely on access. Access to your attention, access to your emotions, access to your responses. Because as long as they can keep you engaged, they can keep you affected. But when you limit that access, when you become selective about what gets your time and what doesn't, you take back control of your internal environment. And that's where real peace begins. Not in changing the people around you, but in changing how much of yourself you allow them to reach. This doesn't mean you withdraw from the world. It doesn't mean you become cold, distant, or disconnected. It means you become intentional about where your energy goes. You can still listen. You can still communicate. You can still stand up for yourself when necessary. But you do it from a place of choice, not obligation. There's a quiet strength in someone who doesn't feel the need to respond immediately, who doesn't feel the need to explain themselves to every critic, who doesn't feel the need to win every argument to feel secure. That person understands something deeper. They understand that peace is more valuable than proving a point. They understand that clarity is more important than being right in every moment. They understand that their energy is too important to be spent on unnecessary conflict. And because of that understanding, they move differently. They pause before they engage. They evaluate before they respond. They filter what enters their mind and what they allow to influence their emotions. And over time, that discipline builds a kind of inner stability that is difficult to shake. Toxic people may still exist around them. Negative situations may still arise, but those things no longer dictate their internal state, because their energy is no longer available to be easily disrupted. And that is the ultimate form of control, not controlling others, but controlling what has access to you. So the next time you're faced with negativity, instead of asking yourself how to respond, take a moment and ask something more powerful. Does this deserve my energy? Because when you start answering that question honestly, you stop reacting to everything and start choosing what truly deserves a place in your life. And that's the moment you realize you didn't just avoid toxic people. You outgrew their influence entirely.